Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Suni Gray and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Tell Us Your English, and we start this new edition right now. Doubts remain over the Venezuelan government's dialogue with the opposition, which was scheduled to restart in the Dominican Republic on Wednesday. Late in the day, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro met with the former Spanish Prime Minister José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, who has led the repeated attempts to open talks with the opposition. Maduro said that dialogue is part of his commitment to bring peace to his country. But opposition representatives refused to turn up on Wednesday, saying the government hadn't invited the foreign ministers they expected to accompany the talks. This Thursday morning, the head of the government's delegation to the talks said he was on his way to the Dominican Republic. Jorge Rodriguez tweeted, "We are taking off for the Dominican Republic with our country's delegation for the dialogue meeting with the Venezuelan opposition." And shortly after that, the opposition representative, Luis Florido, cast further doubt on when and if the talks might start. On his Twitter, he wrote, "Finally, the government of Nicolas Maduro has accepted the participation of the foreign ministers from Mexico, Chile, and Paraguay." He went on, "These countries are ready to take part on this 1st and 2nd of December. We intend to take part to create the conditions for the change that Venezuela needs." In another tweet, Florida indicated that differences within the Venezuelan opposition over whether to take part in the talks might be behind the confusion. And social movements in the Dominican Republic have expressed their support for the talks between the Venezuelan government and the opposition. The Somos Venezuela movement said that dialogue is the only way to solve the conflict in the country. It also demanded respect for Venezuela's Constituent Assembly, rejected the economic welfare carried out by the right, and criticized the interference of the OAS Secretary General, Luis Almagro. Our correspondent Reagan Devine joins us now live from Caracas. Hello, Reagan. So again, we have to ask if anything is happening with those talks in the Dominican Republic.
Hi, Sonia. Yes, well, you and I had spoken yesterday as to whether or not the government and the opposition have made it to the Dominican Republic yesterday. The answer is no. We know now that only today that a delegation comprising of the communications minister, Jorge Rodriguez, the education minister, Elias Chao, and the president of the National Constituent Assembly, Delcy Rodriguez, went across to the Dominican Republic today. But we're not, from the reports we're getting, it's not to carry out peace talks with the opposition, but to determine a methodology for peace talks that are dated for the 1st and 2nd of December. And so that is what we get. That's information that we've gotten from press here in Caracas, that no peace talks are supposed to happen today, but a timetable, a structure for the peace talks for the first 2 days in December will be established in the Dominican Republic. And so the opposition has released information online as well on their social media networks, reminding their supporters, the world, Venezuela, the government as well, of exactly what is on the table on their part. We know the government wants some sort of compromise. They want the country to move forward, economically driven, economically motivated, to recover, basically. The opposition are going to the table with a few wishes. They want free, this is according to Luis Florida of Voluntad Popular. They want free and fair presidential elections. They want international observers at those elections. They want an impartial electoral council, an impartial CNE. They had previously said before that they had wanted all the high-ranking members of the CNE out because they didn't trust the CNE. They also want still the release of political prisoners. We've been hearing this for a long time. They call them political prisoners. So the government, they broke the law. People who were involved in rioting, in dangerous and violent behavior, and encouraging those as well, and damage of property, loss of lives. The opposition also wants a humanitarian channel open where aid can come into Venezuela, food, medicines, etc. So we know what they want and we know what the government wants. We're waiting to see exactly whether or not these peace talks will move ahead calmly, because in the past the opposition has cancelled these peace talks. They just didn't show up. A couple times the government alone had been to Dominican Republic awaiting the arrival of the opposition, but they never showed. And these are after peace talks we started in September. Soini.
Okay, so thank you so much for that update. We've been talking to our correspondent, Regan Devines, in Caracas, Venezuela. On to other news. Trade unionists and social movements from across Latin America and the Caribbean are gathering in Uruguay for the Continental Meeting for Democracy and Against Neoliberalism. The event began with a march to the capital of Montevideo. Some 2,000 participants will discuss how to confront the wave of neoliberal policies and the conservative backlash in the region. The former presidents of Brazil and Uruguay, Lula da Silva and Pepe Mujica, will be taking part. Our correspondent, Jose Sena, was at the summit's opening and he sent this report.
We're here in Montevideo, where the opening march is just setting off from the University of the Republic towards the Montevideo obelisk. This is the first activity of this event for democracy and against neoliberalism, organized by a variety of trade unions from across Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as by social movements. We'll be keeping you up to date on Telesur as the day unfolds.
Jose sent out that report. The Uruguayan government has announced an agreement to build the biggest pulp factory in the world after years of diplomatic disputes over its construction. It would be the largest private investment in that country's history.
After a year and 3 months of intense negotiations with the Finnish company, UPM, an investment agreement was reached that will lead to an increase of 2% of GDP. Furthermore, it will generate 8,000 jobs, equating to $200 million in wages.
It would also imply an increase of exports to the order of $1 billion annually and generate about $120 million in taxes per year.
The investment will further other economic implications.
Over 600 small and medium local industries will benefit from the expected increase of the per capita GDP in the area where the plant will be built. The increase would be somewhere between 10 and 15%.
The new plant will help improve a previously dejected area in the country.
These types of investments in infrastructure are fundamentally necessary for the country, such as the railway, which was already planned as part of the investments. It is going to be built during this period, connecting the central areas of the country with Montevideo, giving one of the more dejected areas a multimodal communication route.
The former mayor of Rio Negro region, where the first UPM plant was built, believes we have to keep expectations in check regarding job creation.
The worst thing we can do is say there's going to be 8,000 jobs. We shouldn't say that. We must be humble about this so as to not disillusion people. I can't remember a time when there's been a higher demand for jobs than today.
The plant will be built on the shores of Rio Negro, about 230 kilometers from Montevideo, and construction will start in 4 years. This has raised an alarm for environmentalist organizations. For its part, the company will provide technical and financial aid, allegedly setting aside $10.5 million to improve water quality.
Dominica is having a Caribbean-wide 5-kilometer race to raise funds for its hurricane recovery efforts. National Security Minister Rayburn Blackmore says the race will take place across 4 different parishes on the island. He also says similar races will take place in several countries around the region, which he says is essential to building solidarity and support from within the Caribbean.
It's going to require the participation of all of us. And so this run, in my view, goes just beyond a run, but it exemplifies, the need for us to actually work together. And of course, having all the various contingents from RSS, from Trinidad, from Jamaica, and from Belize demonstrate the need for us to do things together. And I think it gives us a clear sense as to how important it is for us to collaborate and for us to organize ourselves as one Caribbean people. So I want again to express my gratitude on behalf of the people of Dominica again to the regional armed forces, and I want in particular to welcome the contingent from Belize. They come with a particular skill sets in engineering, etc. The same can be said for contingents from Jamaica and Trinidad and RSS. They come with varying skill sets, and they will be actually helping us in our reconstruction effort, starting first on our public buildings to help to actually cover our buildings, public buildings, and of course they have been involved in the cleaning effort around the country, namely around Roseau, etc. In particular, our colleagues on Jamaica.
More news in a minute, so stay with us. Today is the last day of Chile's campaign, and the candidates will be holding their closing rallies in the country's main cities. Voter abstention has been a growing trend in recent elections in Chile, and there are fears that Sunday's vote could set a record for low turnout. Tighter electoral rules and growing political apathy are blamed by some. The former president, Sebastián Piñera, is ahead in the latest polls. Our correspondent, Francis Castillo, has more details from the Chilean capital of Santiago.
Here in Chile, there are only 3 days left before the general elections, in which people will be electing a new president, as well as a new parliament and regional councillors. Precisely today, Thursday, November 16, we come to the end of the official campaign period. From now on, no election advertising will be allowed, either on TV or radio, nor in any public space. Also, the majority of the candidates will be holding closing events for their campaigns in the most important Chilean cities. The candidates, Sebastián Piñera from Chile Vamos coalition, Alejandro Guillier from Fuerza de la Mayoría, Marco Enríquez Ominami from the Progressive Party, and Eduardo Artés from Patriotic Union, are all closing their campaigns between 6 and 8 p.m. in Santiago. Other candidates will be holding massive events in the city of Concepción. This is the case of Alejandro Navarro and Beatriz Sánchez from the Frente Amplio. We will continue to follow the latest information and bring you more in our next reports.
Francisca Castillo with that report. Social organizations have called upon Guatemalans to take to the streets to protest widespread corruption and to demand that President Jimmy Morales, as well as 112 lawmakers, step down over alleged acts of corruption. Morales is under investigation for an unaccounted $825,000 that he spent during his 2015 presidential election campaign. Under the umbrella of the Citizen Assembly Against Corruption and Impunity in Guatemala, the organizations also called for the reform of the electoral bill for political parties. The 4th National Congress of NGOs has begun in Guatemala City, where the development model imposed by ruling powers in the country is being discussed. More in this report.
Members of different Guatemalan non-governmental organizations have gathered for their 4th National Congress. The discussion here has been focused on the concept of development, arguing that it can't be based on apparent economic stability.
If you compare economic growth with the situation of people here, the poverty has been increasing. It's really clear that economic growth and development are two different things. In other words, national social indicators are increasing in a negative way.
There was growing public opinion about how development was linked to economic growth, which was related to the number of foreign companies with investors in Guatemala. However, according to an economist, living conditions and quality of life are the main factors which determine how developed a society is.
Development is having access to education, health services, housing, infrastructure. I mean, first of all, there has to be a human development that begins with health and education, so that people have dignity and better living conditions.
There have been indigenous and campesino protests in Guatemala against transnational projects and NGOs. Representatives urged the government to promote development that includes local campesinos, as well as promoting local initiatives instead of extractive projects.
Because these kind of projects often create conflicts, instead of solving problems, they create more conflicts and impoverished communities.
At this National Congress, there's also been a demand to reinforce the role of indigenous and campesino women as agents of development in rural communities, specifically for their ancestral knowledge of health and intercultural education.
Panama's President Juan Carlos Varela has attended the opening of the country's new embassy in Beijing, along with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. It's the president's first official visit to China since the two countries established diplomatic relations 5 months ago. President Varela will meet with his counterpart Xi Jinping to sign a number of agreements including trade, tourism and economy, and will stay in China for a week.
We are certain that our embassies in Panama and Beijing will represent the beginning of several joint projects based on inclusion, mutual respect, and bilateral cooperation. This will be the foundation for a better future for our people.
Bolivian activists have occupied the offices of the Defender of the People in La Paz to protest a court ruling limiting the rights guaranteed to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people in 2016 gender identity law. While one group of activists occupied the offices and began a hunger strike, others protested in La Paz's Plaza Murillo to demand their rights. Last week, Bolivia's Supreme Court declared unconstitutional the section of the landmark law that extended marriage and adoption rights to people who change their gender identity. The family of Argentinian activist Santiago Maldonado have released a statement reiterating their demands for an independent investigation into his death. In a statement released Wednesday, the family criticized a decision made by Judge Gustavo Leral, who last week rejected a request by Santiago's brother for an independent review. The Maldonado family is also demanding that the Argentine government assume responsibility for the investigation. The Mapuche community is organizing a joint march in Argentina and Chile to demand the release of political prisoners and to stop the persecution that they continue to face.
This is a monument of Julio Roca, a military official and two-time president of Argentina in the late 1800s. And he was in charge of the operation which saw the execution of the Mapuche people. And now the Mapuche from Chile and Argentina are the ones turning their backs on him.
We understand what the current governments from both countries are trying to promote. They want to recuperate the memory of this genocide to implement it again against our territories and people. And that's why we are turning our backs to Julio Roca and looking forward to the country we want. We want to ask for the solidarity of the Chilean and Argentinian people.
Solidarity and participation in the transnational uprising is planned to take place in December.
Asking the states and nations to demilitarize our territory, to stop judicially harassing and persecuting our people, to release the political prisoners from our people. We ask the world for the immediate release of Facundo, and we remind you of the disappearance and death of Santiago Maldonado, which happened in the context of the solidarity with the Mapuche people. We want also a trial and punishment for those responsible for the death and disappearance of Santiago Maldonado.
Female indigenous leaders are also speaking out against the authorities who are ignoring their claims. Claims which are supported by human rights groups and social movements.
We want to prove to the Argentine and Chilean states that the Mapuche has no borders. We had them imposed. We're treated as terrorists. We're protecting our territory. We want to have territory. We want our children to grow up with all the beauty we've had. We're guardians of our territory. We're not terrorists.
The Mapuche community lives at the border of the Andes, and they demand recognition of their territory.
We'll be back very soon, so stay with us. The United Nations climate talks, known as COP23, are into their penultimate day at the German city of Bonn. Environmental campaigners say governments still need to commit to more radical action more quickly to avoid catastrophic climate change.
As the UN climate talks continue in Bonn, delegates from over 200 countries are attempting to find a consensus on ways of bolstering the Paris Climate Pact that aims to end the fossil fuel era this century. The President of Switzerland encouraged the participants to work together to achieve real results.
Our population wants that we end our discussions and find our solutions. So please, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, let's work our teams hard, but let's also tell them discussions must have a solution and a result. Switzerland remains steadfast and remains very ambitious, and I hope that everybody joins us.
World leaders have arrived to join the climate talks. The French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel both condemned U.S. President Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
Internationally, we need scientific expertise, a scientific debate which is constantly informed, which enlightens our decision-making. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is one of the major actors in this, but today it's under threat from the United States' decision not to guarantee its funding. I would therefore like Europe to stand in the place of the Americans. And I want to tell you here that France will not be taking a backseat.
And against this backdrop in the US, a broad alliance made up of numerous states, cities and businesses has formed and put forward a commitment to the American pledge. I would like to warmly welcome this step as it emphasises the support for the climate agreement across large parts of the US, regardless of the decision of President Trump to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement.
The conference also heard an emotive speech from a young representative of Fiji, asking the assistants to take action. Fiji was recently declared the most at-risk country in the world from the effects of climate change.
Early in 2016, we were hit by one of the strongest cyclones ever struck Fiji, the strongest in the southern hemisphere. My home, my school, our source of food, water, money was totally destroyed. My life was in chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, speeches and tasks will not solve the problem, but walk the talk is more effective. Let's change our mindset and set a platform in combating this environmental issue for our next generation. We need to prepare ourselves. Safety precaution has to be adopted and followed to keep us safe.
Greenpeace activists crashed the COP23 party, protesting against Germany's use of coal. They sailed around a coal freighter on the Rhine River, carrying banners reading "Action, not hypocrisy" and "Merkel's dirty secret, coal." The Chancellor admitted that Germany still needs to discuss with the companies that use coal to achieve its climate targets.
And here's just some of the other stories making headlines around the world.
Longtime President of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, is holding talks with South African negotiators over his future after the military took control on Wednesday. Envoys from the Southern African Development Community are trying to reach a deal with the 93-year-old leader on the country's future. Meanwhile, Zimbabwe's opposition leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, says Mugabe must resign. A group of 6 House Democrats from the left of the party have introduced 5 articles of impeachment against United States President Donald Trump. The articles range from obstruction of justice for interfering in the Russia investigation to making charges of fake news against the media. The move is seen as a symbolic one, with Representative Stephen Ira Cohen saying that he knows the filing is a long shot in the Republican-controlled House and Senate. France's unions took to the streets of Paris in largely muted protests against President Emmanuel Macron's business-friendly reform agenda. The CGT union, who organized the demonstrations, has struggled to get other unions behind the protests against the labor reform overhaul.
It's not spilling over today, where all the ingredients are there. You only have to look at President Macron's popularity ratings, so perhaps we haven't succeeded in creating conditions where employees can demonstrate in mass. But the reasons to protest are there. If it's not today, it'll be tomorrow. We'll continue on our path because we don't have any other options in the light of the agenda President Macron is trying to force on us.
French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian says that Lebanese Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri is free to travel to France. Le Drian made the comments after meeting with Hariri in Saudi Arabia. Lebanon's President Michel Aoun tweeted that he hoped the crisis over the resignation and stay in Saudi Arabia would soon end, with Hariri visiting France. 5 months after the ferocious fire that ripped through the Grenfell Tower apartment block in London, the Metropolitan Police have confirmed that 71 people died. The police said the probe pushed the boundaries of scientific investigation.
Now that search and recovery and identification operation has been very challenging and arduous in so many ways. Our specially trained officers working with experts, forensic archaeologists, forensic anthropologists have by hand been conducting a fingertip search on each and every floor, in each and every room of every flat and every communal area within Grenfell Tower.
And with that, we've come to the end of this midday news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Suni Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
Un pueblo es su memoria, de dónde venimos, quiénes somos, para poder decir a dónde vamos. Cuando me preguntan qué personajes de la revolución del siglo XX en América Latina me conmueven, me vienen de inmediato a la cabeza 3 nombres. El primero es el Che, el segundo es Pancho Villa y el tercero es Antonio Guiteras. Ahora tengo más raíces. Ahora sé de dónde vengo.
Pudo marcar en la revolución cubana, en la juventud, y que hoy en nuestros días es todavía un ejemplo y un paradigma para nosotros.
Y habría que añadir uno de los nuestros.
Los nuestros. Tuesdays. Only on Telesur. In a world infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deepening into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on Telesur.